She slapped me. In front of 80 guests, photographers, and her own husband, my husband, who didn't say a single word. I'm Calla Whitmore. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't part of their family. I was their funding strategy. When Blaine's mother announced, without warning, that I'd be gifting $50,000 to his sister's wedding, it wasn't a gesture. It was an ambush. But here's the thing. They thought I'd be too polite, too quiet, too complicit. They were wrong. Have you ever been betrayed by not just a partner, but their entire family? What would you have done at that table? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your take. Because what happened after that slap turned into a legal firestorm they never saw coming. I never imagined that a dinner party would be the spark that burned down my entire marriage. The Radfords always did everything big. Big houses, big cars, big lies. So when Blaine's little sister got engaged, of course the celebration had to be extravagant. It was held at a private vineyard in Napa Valley, the kind of place where the wine costs more than a month of my rent back when I had one-bedroom dreams. When we arrived, I was shuffled to the far end of the dinner table, next to the kitchen entrance. Blaine didn't say anything. He just smiled that politician smile of his and excused himself to check on something. His mother gave me the once-over, like I was an undercooked appetizer. "We've kept your seat warm," she said sweetly through her eyes, said, "You're lucky we even let you sit." As I took my place, my fingers grazed the napkin folded into a swan. Embroidered in gold thread was the Radford crest. I remembered when I first saw it, months before the wedding, how honored I felt. Now, it felt more like a stamp on property I never agreed to be. I tried to ignore the sting. I smiled through the clinking glasses and hollow compliments, reminding myself this wasn't about me. It was about Blaine's sister. Family. Unity. But then came the toast. Tonight, Mrs. Radford stood and raised her glass. We celebrate love, tradition, and generosity. And in the spirit of that, my wonderful daughter-in-law, Calla, would like to present the newlyweds with a special family gift, just like we did for Blaine and me. A wedding fund of $50,000. There was a pause, a moment of stunned silence that spread like spilled wine across the table. My heart stopped. Blaine didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His silence was a cue, a trap I didn't know I was walking into. All eyes turned to me. Someone actually clapped. I blinked, unable to move, the room suddenly spinning. A flash went off. Someone had taken a photo. Across the room, I saw a man in a gray blazer smirking as he angled his phone for another shot. Great, this was going to be public. I stood slowly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Radford's smile didn't waver. "Oh, darling, you've always said you wanted to contribute to the family legacy. $50,000 isn't a contribution," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's extortion with floral centerpieces." Gasps. Actual gasps. Blaine finally spoke, voice low. "Calla not here." "No." I turned to him. "Exactly here." He clenched his jaw, eyes darting toward the press table. There were reporters, photographers. Of course there were. Mrs. Radford took a step closer, her voice tight but still sugar-coated. "Calla, don't be ungrateful. This is a Radford tradition." "Then fund it with Radford money," I replied. I wasn't born into this family, but I didn't sign up to bankroll it either. The silence that followed was thick with judgment. I caught the eyes of a woman sitting across the table, a college friend of Blaine's. She looked like she wanted to speak up, but her fiancé put a hand on her wrist, gently pressing her back into silence. Mrs. Radford slapped me. It wasn't hard, but it was public. I didn't react. I just stared at her, then looked around at the sea of shocked faces, most of them staring at their phones, already texting, tweeting, recording. A child at the far end of the table whispered to her mother, "Why did she hit the pretty lady?" Her mom scooped her up and walked away. I turned and walked out of the venue. Not a single person followed me. Outside, the air was cool and biting. I stood in the dark for a moment, letting the wind cut through my dress, willing myself not to cry. The lights of the vineyard blurred behind me. I could still hear the music muffled through the tall windows, see silhouettes laughing as if I were never there. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. This was just phase 1, the text read, "You're not ready for what's next." I stared at the screen until the cold finally forced me to move. I didn't know who sent the message, but I knew one thing clearly. This wasn't just a family betrayal. It was a setup, and I was done playing the part of their silent investor. I went back to the hotel that night not as Blaine's wife, but as Calla Whitmore, the woman they underestimated. That would be their first mistake. It started with a single name, Ilia Valles. The morning after the vineyard disaster, I sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor of our penthouse, my laptop balanced on one knee, Blaine's freshly brewed coffee untouched beside me. He was still asleep in the bedroom, unaware that the woman he underestimated had just entered phase 1 of her own plan. I hadn't checked our bank accounts in months. Blaine always took care of things. But the silence after the slap, the stillness of no one following me out of that party, had woken something up in me. And that something whispered, "Look." So I did. The joint account looked normal enough at first, groceries, utilities, travel. But the deeper I went, the more fractures I found. Small transactions, all under $2,000, spaced just far enough apart to seem innocent, but frequent enough to signal a pattern. A company I'd never heard of, Valles Consulting, showed up 5 times. 5. Each one marked as strategy services. My stomach turned. I clicked through to the bank's help chat, requested contact details. Nothing. No phone number, no location. Just a shell. I heard footsteps behind me and quickly minimized the screen. Blaine entered, shirtless, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning," he said, yawning as he leaned in to kiss my cheek. "Coffee smells good." I forced a smile. "Yours is cold now. Want me to make another?" He shook his head and poured himself a cup. "Did you sleep?" "A little," I said, standing to gather the scattered receipts I'd printed. "Hey, random question. Do you know what Valles Consulting is?" His hand froze halfway to his mouth. He said quickly. "Sounds familiar. One of the firms I consulted with for that estate case last fall, maybe." I didn't respond. He took a sip, then added with an artificial casualness, "Why?" I shrugged. "It just popped up in a conversation yesterday. Thought I'd heard it before." He watched me closely, then smiled. "You always notice everything." "Not everything," I thought. "Not until now." That afternoon, Blaine suggested we sync up our finances. It came out of nowhere as we were folding laundry like nothing had imploded 24 hours ago. "You know," he said, "just in case something happens, car accident, illness, we should keep all passwords and accounts in one place." I looked up from a sweater and smiled faintly. "You're right. We should." He visibly relaxed. I excused myself, went to the study, and closed the door. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number that had been sitting on my notes app for months. I never thought I'd need it. Eleanor Shaw answered on the second ring. "Eleanor, it's Calla Whitmore. I'm ready to talk." She didn't ask why. She simply said, "Come in tomorrow. We'll lock it down before he does." That night, Blaine left his phone on the table unlocked. That never happened. I didn't reach for it immediately. I waited. He showered. I counted every drop hitting porcelain until the water stopped. Then I picked it up. One new message. "Ilia Valles. She's asking questions. Stick to the timeline. My skin went cold. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been and took a long, silent breath. The plan was real. I wasn't imagining it. And Ilya Valas wasn't some consultant. She was his accomplice. Blaine emerged from the shower moments later, towel slung over his shoulder like he hadn't just been caught mid-conspiracy. Decided on dinner? He asked. I turned toward him, voice steady. Not yet. He smiled. Whatever you want. Tonight's about you. Liar. Later, when he fell asleep, I retrieved the documents Eleanor had sent over and opened a secure account in my name only. I transferred my separate funds, design income, premarital investments, savings from my mother's will, into an irrevocable trust. Something no one, not even a spouse, could touch without a court order. I also began logging everything: calls, texts, financial documents. I created a folder named Phase 0. It felt good to move in silence, but it wasn't enough. The next morning, Blaine made eggs, hummed a song, kissed my temple. Then he slid a folder across the marble kitchen island. Just something for taxes, he said casually. I flipped it open. It was a consolidation agreement, hidden beneath lines of legalese. It would have given Blaine control over every asset I had left in my name. Have you ever realized you were just a line item in someone else's plan? That every I love you came with a hidden invoice? If you've ever felt like love was just leverage, drop a comment number 7 below. Now, let's see how I began to rewrite the script. He smiled when I froze. You trust me, right? I stared at him. Of course. Then I picked up the folder, walked calmly to the fireplace, and fed it to the flames. You're right, I said. This marriage does need protection. I watched his smile collapse. Later that evening, I stood in our guest room, staring at my reflection. I looked like the same woman I'd always been, same face, same voice. But everything had changed. This wasn't paranoia. This was war. And I had just lit my match. You filed for divorce on my birthday? That was the line that greeted me when I opened the envelope, 1 week after I thought I had regained control. The morning light slanted across the marble countertop, highlighting the bold header, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. My name, in cold black ink, next to Blaine's. And the date. My birthday. I stared at the page for a long time, blinking like I hadn't slept, which I hadn't. There was no discussion. No separation conversation. Just a blindside legal maneuver and an itemized list of everything he believed he was entitled to. Half the condo, half the car, a chunk of our design firm's retained earnings, even spousal support. Spousal support. From me. To him. I walked into Eleanor's office that afternoon like I had steel in my spine. He's trying to empty your wallet and rewrite the story, she said without looking up, flipping through the pages like they were a bad script. Can we counter? I asked. We already have, she said, sliding a folder across the desk. And here's the best part. He's too late. The trust is locked, time-stamped, and legally sound. Which means he gets nothing. Exactly. I sat back in the chair, tension bleeding from my shoulders. For a minute. But then Eleanor pushed forward another document. This is what he filed with the court. The public one. I scanned the first page and felt my stomach drop. He wasn't just filing for divorce. He was claiming marital misconduct. That I had intentionally withheld financial records, mismanaged funds, and acted in bad faith. He's making you look like the villain, Eleanor said flatly. He's trying to win the sympathy war. He's trying to build a narrative. If this goes to trial, it'll be about perception, not proof. I shook my head. We stick to facts. That's why you have me. That evening, Blaine returned home like nothing had changed. He dropped his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I watched him from across the room, me in silence, him pretending this wasn't a war zone. "You filed on my birthday," I said. He looked up unfazed. "I didn't pick the date. You picked everything else." Blaine shrugged. "You made your move. I made mine. It's not a game. To you, maybe." That night, I moved into the guest room. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I cataloged. Every time he rolled his eyes. Every time he pretended like I wasn't unraveling the seams of his perfect plan. Every wordless smirk when he walked past my door. Eleanor and I met again 2 days later to prep our reply. We had statements, exhibits, and a timeline. Every dollar I'd transferred, every trust clause, every account closure, documented and ordered. "He'll push you to react emotionally," Eleanor warned. "He wants you to snap, to look unstable. Then I'll give him silence." And I did. When the preliminary hearing came, I wore gray. Blaine wore navy and that smirk he reserved for when he thought he was winning. We sat across from each other, flanked by attorneys. His lawyer spoke first. "My client seeks equitable distribution of all marital assets, including property and liquid accounts. He also seeks temporary support during proceedings, citing significant financial disadvantage." Eleanor stood. "We moved to strike all financial claims," she said. "My client's assets were separated prior to any formal filing through an irrevocable trust established within her legal rights. Additionally, we submit full documentation of asset division, as well as proof of financial independence on both sides." The judge, stoic, unreadable, scanned the files. Blaine leaned forward, whispering something to his lawyer. She nodded stiffly. The courtroom held its breath. After a long pause, the judge looked up. "There is no basis for financial distribution from the petitioner. All claims are denied at this stage. You may refile with new evidence if any exists." Translation: he gets nothing. Blaine's jaw twitched. Outside, as we exited the courthouse, he caught up to me. "You think this means you've won?" "No," I said. "I think this means you lost." He stepped closer. "You're enjoying this." "I'm surviving it." He snorted, bitter. "You always had a way of twisting things. You always had a way of underestimating me." I turned and walked away. Later that night, alone in the apartment, I received an email forwarded from Eleanor. Subject: Inquiry from legal journalist. Content: We're researching high-profile divorce cases involving trust protection and potential misuse of litigation. Would your client be available for a brief interview? Blaine wasn't just losing in court. He was losing in public. And something told me he wasn't going to let that go quietly. They didn't just want to ruin my finances. They wanted to erase my credibility. The letter arrived in a stiff envelope, thick and official, with the same cold weight as the divorce petition. But this time, the accusation was criminal, financial fraud. The language was technical, but the intent was clear. Blaine and Ilya were accusing me of forging financial records to hide assets. Eleanor read it 3 times before looking up. "They've fabricated documents." "How can you tell?" I asked, pacing. "Because of these transfers? They're dated months before the trust was even established. One of the accounts listed didn't even exist back then." That was the crack. The one flaw in their perfect lie. Beatrix, Eleanor's forensic financial analyst, joined us in her usual calm, deadly tone. Someone tried to spoof timestamps. Basic digital forgery, but they forgot to check the account creation logs. Rookie mistake. I sat still, the words anchoring me. For once, I wasn't just on the defense. I had proof, irrefutable proof, that they were lying. And I wasn't going to waste it. We don't just respond, I said. We go on the offensive. Eleanor's eyes gleamed. Then let's prep. We filed a motion the next day to dismiss the fraud claim and countersued for defamation and submission of falsified legal evidence. It hit like a grenade in legal circles. Suddenly, Blaine wasn't a victim. He was the accused. The hearing was set within a week. That morning, I wore black. Blaine came in late, eyes bloodshot, Ilya glued to his side. She looked smaller than I remembered, less bold now that her name was on a legal document, not a burner phone. As we waited for the judge, whispers floated from the gallery. A legal blogger in the second row scribbled furiously into a notepad. Beatrix sat behind me with her laptop open, files already queued. Then the judge entered. Eleanor opened without hesitation. Your Honor, we believe the petitioner's fraud accusation is not only false but malicious. The documents submitted as evidence contain altered metadata and falsified timestamps. Our expert will demonstrate these manipulations. Beatrix was called to the stand. Her testimony was clinical, devastating. She walked through each fake transfer, highlighted the real account creation dates, showed the audit trail logs. She even demonstrated how the PDF documents had been modified post-download. Every time she said, "This transfer could not have occurred on the stated date," Blaine shifted in his seat. Ilya clenched her jaw. Then Eleanor brought out the final blow, a screen recording showing the original file properties before Blaine's team had altered them. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward. Are you alleging the petitioner knowingly submitted falsified evidence? Yes, Your Honor, Eleanor said. And we request that the court sanction both Mr. Radford and Ms. Valles. Blaine's lawyer stood, sputtering. We request a recess to review. Motion denied. The judge said firmly. Your client had time to verify his documents. Blaine looked ready to combust. Ilya avoided everyone's gaze. The judge took a moment, then issued the ruling. The motion for financial fraud is dismissed with prejudice. The countersuit for defamation and falsification may proceed. We had turned their weapon against them, and it stuck. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. I kept walking. Later, in Eleanor's office, she poured 2 glasses of scotch, her version of celebration. To their arrogance, she said. To our receipts, I replied. Before Eleanor even spoke, the sight of the forged accusations reminded me of something from weeks ago, a night I almost let slip by. I'd caught Blaine hovering over his laptop, multiple windows open, a spreadsheet highlighted in red. He told me it was work-related. But now, the layout matched too closely to one of the exhibits they submitted. I should have trusted my instinct then. I had saved nothing. I had no screenshot. But the memory burned back now with violent clarity. And Beatrix, silent during most of our meetings until this one, finally added, "We've seen this kind of amateur forgery before. Quick edits made late at night. No audit trail, hoping it'll slip by unnoticed." That clicked something. The night Blaine stayed up past 2 a.m. claiming he was finalizing last-minute filings. My gut had twisted, but I buried it under hope. That was the last night I gave him benefit of the doubt. Later, as we walked out of the courtroom victorious, I caught sight of a photographer snapping frames just beyond the media rope. I knew her, freelancer from an independent outlet focused on women in litigation. She gave me a nod, not the usual press hunger, but something quieter. Respect. The next day, her article went viral. The wife who refused to fold. Margot sent it to me with a text. Printed it. Framed it. Hung it above my coffee machine. Even Beatrix, usually reserved, forwarded it with nothing but a gif of Beyoncé holding a baseball bat. In that moment, I knew the counterattack hadn't just worked legally, it had landed publicly too. But the battle wasn't over. As I checked my phone that night, I found an anonymous message. "You might have won this round, but Blaine doesn't play fair when he's cornered." I stared at the screen, unmoved. He could cheat, forge, lie all he wanted. I had something stronger, the truth, and the patience to let it cut deep. "You dragged my name through the dirt. Now I'm dragging you through court." That sentence echoed in my head as I stood before the courthouse steps, watching Blaine and Ilya arrive flanked by their attorneys. This time, they weren't the accusers. They were the accused. And I was the one holding the sword. Eleanor had called it poetic symmetry. I just called it overdue. 2 weeks had passed since the judge greenlit our countersuit. In that time, Blaine's PR team had gone into overdrive, leaking soft-focus press photos of him, moving on, and hinting that I was struggling emotionally. But perception couldn't outmaneuver proof. And today, the proof was ours. Inside, the gallery was packed. Reporters, law students, even a few former colleagues. Apparently, watching Blaine Radford fall from grace was the trial of the month. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge entered with the weight of someone who knew exactly what this case had become. Eleanor opened. "Your Honor, my client, Calla Whitmore, is seeking damages for defamation, reputational harm, and willful submission of falsified evidence to the court, actions carried out jointly by Mr. Radford and Ms. Valles with intent to deceive the legal process and destroy my client's credibility." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Then she handed over the exhibits. Beatrix's audit reports, timeline overlays, comparison files, metadata logs. Organized. Bulletproof. Blaine's attorney tried to object, said the claims were retaliatory and emotionally motivated. Eleanor barely blinked. "This isn't emotional. It's forensic." The judge reviewed everything for what felt like hours. Then came the questions. One by one, Eleanor dismantled the lies. Blaine was asked about file access. Ilya about the PDF edits. Beatrix testified again, walking the court through how they used out-of-date software to backdate documents. At one point, Ilya tried to blame a paralegal. The courtroom actually laughed. Blaine stopped making eye contact. When it was my turn to speak, I stood calmly. "I trusted my husband," I said. "I gave him access to my time, my money, and my name. He used that access to stage a false collapse of trust and paint me as dishonest. I didn't fight back with rumors. I fought with records. Have you ever had to fight lies with nothing but receipts and resilience? That moment when silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. If you've ever taken back your power without raising your voice, comment number 9 below. Let's see how justice finally echoed louder than their lies. I sat down. No dramatics. Just the truth. The judge leaned back. I have rarely seen such a thorough trail of intentional misrepresentation presented to this court. The counterclaim stands. We will now move into the damages phase. It was over. Not with a bang, but with Blaine's face draining of color, Ilya's shoulders caving inward, and a silence so heavy it pressed into the marble floor. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the wall of flashbulbs didn't hit me like they used to. I didn't flinch. I let them capture exactly what they wanted, me, standing firm, not a trace of fear. Behind the barricades, a young woman held up a handmade sign. Truth, tactics. I didn't know her, but our eyes met. She nodded. And for a second, I felt like I wasn't just defending myself. I was holding ground for all the women who had been called liars by men who wore suits and smiles. A camera crew whispered my name, but didn't dare step forward. One journalist muttered to another, "She's colder than he ever was." They meant it as insult. I took it as evolution. Margot was waiting by the car. She handed me a bottle of cold, sparkling water and said, You didn't just win. You buried them. That night, I got home and found a bouquet of black tulips waiting at my door. No card, just a note. You looked good losing everything. Ivy. Ilya. Of course. I tossed the flowers in the trash and washed my hands 3 times. The next morning, the news broke. Blaine Radford and Ilya Valles were under formal review for professional misconduct. Bar investigation pending. Multiple firms cutting ties. Even the real estate deals Blaine had quietly invested in started to sour. Eleanor sent me one word: checkmate. That evening, Margot played a news segment for me on her laptop. Blaine ducking behind tinted glass, Ilya staring stone-faced at her phone. The news anchor didn't mince words. A textbook case of legal retaliation gone wrong. On screen, side-by-side images of our court sketches made their rounds. Mine calm. Theirs collapsing. Beatrix, ever dry, texted a screenshot of the anchor's quote with the caption, "I'd frame this." It wasn't just a verdict. It was a broadcast. It was legacy correction. Still, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because people like Blaine don't implode cleanly. They splatter. 2 days after the ruling, my doorbell rang just past noon. When I opened it, a courier stood there, crisp uniform, badge on chest. Calla Whitmore? I nodded. He handed me an envelope thick with formal weight. You've been served. Not again. I closed the door before opening the documents on my kitchen counter. The heading chilled me. Civil investigation notice. Blaine and Ilya had filed a formal complaint with regulatory authorities, this time accusing me of systemic fraud and falsifying statements in multiple financial filings. They were escalating. Eleanor called within minutes. They're trying to trigger a government probe, she said. If they succeed, it won't be a court fight. It'll be federal. I paced the kitchen, heart hammering. Is it credible? No, she said firmly, but it's dangerous. We arranged an emergency meeting that night. Beatrix joined via video, files already pulled and annotated. They submitted the same forged documents, she said, sliding them across the screen. But we've got new proof. What kind? Time zone discrepancies, Beatrix replied. The fake records claim a transfer was initiated at 3:21 p.m. Central, but the system logs say 2:21 p.m. Eastern. That transfer couldn't have happened. The source database didn't even exist in Central until 2 weeks later. I blinked. They didn't just fake records, they faked them badly. Sloppier than last time, Eleanor said. And desperate. That's when I knew. Blaine was done playing smart. He was just throwing knives in the dark, hoping something would stick. I sat still for a moment. Then I said it out loud. We don't respond this time. Eleanor raised a brow. You want to stay quiet? No, I said. I want to finish it. And I meant it. We drafted our final move. A motion proving fabrication with metadata overlays, plus a parallel civil suit for damages, including attorney fees and loss of income due to reputational harm. By the time the court date arrived, the media had lost interest. But I hadn't. I wore white. Not for peace. For clarity. Inside, Blaine's new lawyer tried to delay again. My client requires more time. No, the judge cut in. Your client has had months. We proceed. Eleanor presented everything in calm waves, timeline anomalies, server logs, geographic mismatches. Beatrix detailed each discrepancy like a surgeon. When the judge reviewed the files, her decision came faster than any of us expected. The court finds the evidence submitted by Mr. Radford and Ms. Valles to be knowingly falsified and materially deceptive. Sanctions are imposed. All pending claims dismissed. The counterclaim for damages proceeds immediately. Blaine slumped. Ilya didn't even turn. I didn't celebrate, but I did smile. The courtroom that day felt like a mausoleum, silent, clinical, final. The windows filtered light in narrow beams that cut through the dust like scalpels. Blaine's chair creaked every time he shifted, though he tried not to move. Ilya didn't look up once. Not at the judge, not at me, not even when the ruling dropped like a gavel through concrete. When the verdict was read, a woman in the gallery, maybe a paralegal, maybe just someone who had followed the whole case, let out a breath so loud it echoed. Even the air held still, like the room itself had been waiting for Blaine's story to end. Outside, the sky had turned the color of iron. The wind lifted the ends of my coat as I descended the courthouse steps. Across the street, a local news crew fumbled with their gear, too late to catch anything live. One camera operator, recognizing me, simply lowered his lens. No more questions. No more spin. Later, Eleanor texted a link. The city's legal blog had just posted their headline. Radford's Collapse, a case study in self-destruction. The accompanying image was a sketch of Ilya looking away from Blaine as he buried his head in his hands. Below it, another article had already begun trending. Calla Whitmore, from defendant to damager. I didn't forward it to anyone, but I did save it. That evening, as I stood on the rooftop of my building, the skyline bled orange and blue. Below, the city pulsed like circuitry, noisy, alive, oblivious. I took a deep breath, letting the cold cut into my lungs, letting it clear the last residue of his name from my chest. Then I went back inside, opened the laptop, kept writing. I've taken back everything they tried to steal. The truth, my dignity, and my freedom. The fight is over, and for the first time in a long time, I get to live on my own terms, in peace, untouched by their chaos. Here's what I've learned. When you stand up for yourself, you don't just reclaim your worth. You expose the cruelty of those who believed they'd never face consequences. Karma misses no one, especially those who knowingly harm and expect to walk away clean. But what about you? Have you ever had to rise after betrayal or injustice? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might find strength in your words. And if stories of resilience, justice, and new beginnings speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. We've still got so much more to write together.